Who is really behind the Great Reset? Is the World Economic Forum only a front for the real power? Lately, like many analysts and prophecy teachers, I've been focused on the World Economic Forum and their role in the global government takeover and the Great Reset. Mainly because the World Economic Forum's notorious founder, Klaus Schwab, is such a big mouth. He can't help but talk about their future plans for a world takeover. But are Klaus and the politicians that follow him in the World Economic Forum just frontmen for what is happening in our world? And if so, why don't we know more about those in charge? Well, in this video, you're about to find out who a number of them are. The news media has kept silent about those who are the power behind the throne, but if you carefully examine World Economic Forum documents, you can find them out. But first, a shout out to Rick Knight, longtime member of our community, for providing the research for this important video. Now, why have Klaus Schwab and his politician cronies at the World Economic Forum been so upfront about their comments about a global takeover? It seems the elites within the WEF got way too excited about the COVID pandemic, thinking that they had the perfect crisis in order to implement numerous globalist policies in the form of their Great Reset. As it turned out, COVID wasn't nearly as deadly as they had initially predicted, and the public was not nearly as compliant as they had hoped they would be. Perhaps the World Economic Forum let the cat out of the bag a little too early. I think they were thinking the Great Reset would have already happened. In the leaked plans from the Canadian government and Trudeau's planning committee, they anticipated a September 2021 date for the Great Reset, and obviously that didn't happen. Since September 2021, we have experienced a series of crises. A crisis of crises, so to speak, with a new worldwide crisis about every 4 months. If you think about it, it's almost like birth pangs for the birth of something. New painful crises happening about every 4 months. You have a pandemic, you have racial riots, a controversial election, you have a January 6th riot, you have vaccine mandates, you have inflationary cycles that are going through the roof, you have a Ukraine crisis, you have the threat of nuclear war. This just goes on and on. Jesus called a similar crisis of crises the beginning of the birth pangs in Matthew 24. It seems like someone is trying out new crises until we get to the one event that they think will drive the masses to accept one world government and the surrender of all their assets, things like money, houses, cars. If you were intentionally planning a world takeover, this is exactly what you would do. You'd try out crises after crises that don't do terminal damage to the planet. You're just ramping them up a little worse after a little worse after a little worse. So you'd try out these minor crises up to the level of damage until the whole world cries uncle and surrenders. That's what you'd do, I'm sure. So if that is the plan, who's behind it? The World Economic Forum? And while the World Economic Forum is regularly attended by top-level globalists, they are more of a think tank. The shadowy Council for Inclusive Capitalism might just be about implementation of these plans. So why haven't you heard about them? Well, if you were planning something this devious, this evil, you would want to hide in the shadows yourself and have others take the blame. Mafia kingpins usually have hitmen do their dirty work rather than actually pulling the trigger themselves. And international thieves are the same, even if they're billionaires. So it makes sense that they would place people like Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, George Soros, Anthony Fauci out in the open to take the blame, when in reality, these people are only puppets of a greater power. So who is the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, the CIC? The founder of the group is Lynn Forrester de Rothschild. Did you hear that name? A member of the infamous Rothschild dynasty that has long been monetarily involved in influencing governments. And Pope Francis and the Vatican are publicly aligned with the Council. And one of the primary narratives of the CIC is that all religions must unite with the leaders of capital to build a society and an economy that's, quote, fair for all. If everyone has nothing, then no one has any more than anyone else. It'll be fair. It'll be completely inclusive, completely equitable. Everyone will be incredibly poor and miserable, except those at the top. But isn't this just a conspiracy theory? Well, for many years, the agenda for global governance was only whispered about within elite circles. But every once in a while, one of them would speak out about it in public. Perhaps, to ease the public into accepting the possibility. Whenever they did mention it, they would call it the New World Order. George Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Tony Blair, George Soros, Henry Kissinger have all mentioned the New World Order over the years. Bill Clinton's Deputy Secretary of State, Strobe Talbot, stated in Time magazine that, quote, in the next century, which is the century we're in right now, nations as we know it will become obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. National sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all. End of quote. It appears they think that time is finally here. And did you notice these men were leaders of their countries, yet they seemed eager, if not happy, to surrender those countries to the New World Order. Why? Because they're just puppets. And it is fairly easy for the powers behind the throne to either blackmail, buy, and force the puppet governments to do what they want. So if that's true, why hasn't the New World Order taken over already? Here's a quote from globalist and Council on Foreign Relations member Richard Gardner from all the way back in 1974 in Foreign Affairs magazine. Quote, in short, the House of World Order, and he's talking about the New World Order there, will have to be built from the bottom up rather than the top down. It will look like a great, booming, buzzing confusion, to use William James's famous description of reality, but an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. End of quote. He said from the ground up. The couple hundred people, in the CIC cannot control 7 billion people who don't want to be controlled. That's why the trucker protests in Canada and the farmer protests right now taking place all over the world are scary to the CIC. The masses hold power. The CIC has to convince the masses that world government is in their best interest. Now, did you also notice this man described what they were already planning 50 years ago as booming, buzzing confusion? Kind of sounds like the crisis of crises we are now experiencing. Yet what media company is willing to say that we're experiencing something unusual or different than what the world normally experiences? None of them. And none of them have mentioned that the beginnings of global government already exist. It's called the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, and none of them are talking about them. The CIC is led by a core group of global leaders they refer to as, quote, the Guardians. No, we're not joking. This is absolutely correct. You can Google it for yourself. The 27 leaders, known as the Guardians, include Ajay Banga of MasterCard, Mark Benioff of Salesforce, and Brian Moynihan of Bank of America, who just happened to have spoken at the World Economic Forum this year. They meet every single year with Pope Francis and Cardinal Peter Turkson, who leads the Vatican department dealing with social issues. to strategize what they're going to do. Other members of the CIC include the Teachers Union. Yes, the Teachers Union. Wonder why our schools are like they are, or why so many politicians are beholden to this union? That's why they're part of the leadership. Other members include Allianz, DuPont, the United Nations, CalPERS, British Petroleum, Bank of America, Johnson & Johnson, Visa, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, Mark Carney of the United Nations, the Treasurer of the State of California. Did you hear that? And many more. The list is extensive, but what it represents is a kind of corporate-led government. They plan to eliminate the middleman, who are our current nations and our national leaders. Can you see why the previous president of America and the idea of putting America first was such a threat to them? Members of the CIC, including the Bank of America, openly suggest they don't need governments to meet their goals. They say corporations can implement and socially engineer the world without political aid. In other words, it is the very definition of a shadow government. So a massive corporate cabal that works in tandem with each other to implement social changes without any oversight at all. No rules, no laws. We've already seen this with the spread of woke ideology by hundreds, if not thousands of corporations all working together as a beehive. Have you ever wondered why this is happening now? This is why. The CIC is why. It's part of their takeover. One of the top missions of the CIC has been to change our economic model to promote, quote, equity and inclusion, end of quote. Don't laugh too hard at this, but the CIC argues that too much wealth has been accumulated in the hands of too few people. Yet they are the very people that have rigged the current system to centralize all that wealth into their own hands. Do you actually see the Rothschilds and other central bankers surrendering their wealth? No, it's your wealth they want to distribute. They consider themselves above that. They are, in their minds, an aristocracy. Do you really think these people are going to build a whole new system that doesn't continue to benefit them, and even more so than today? And if you've ever wondered why the Pope, this Pope, has been pushing woke ideology, climate alarmism, and one world religion, all in conflict with traditional Christian doctrine, this is why. He's following the dictates of the CIC. As we reported on in this previous video, his goal is to become the top religious leader in the world, and this is how he figures he's going to do it. Is the CIC the final form of global government? No, but it is the beginning of it. A government by corporations and money elites for corporations and the elites. It's going to bypass all political representation, all checks and balances, all laws, all voters. It's conglomerates and their partners making decisions for society in a centralized dictatorial fashion. The World Economic Forum calls this stakeholder capitalism. The plan is to have nations surrender their national sovereignty and cooperate with the United Nations. The UN in turn will drop the current Security Council of the USA, Russia, China, Britain, France, etc., you know the group, and replace it with the heads of corporations that they call thought leaders, an extremely scary term. I do not want these people guiding or leading my thoughts, but that's the plan. And this plan used to be known as Agenda 2030 in the UN, but they have moved the timeline up. It is now called Agenda 2023. Click right here to keep watching and discover what the UN itself has to say about these stakeholders that they call thought leaders, who they might be, Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.